Hello, guys, and welcome back to our next live interview. I'm here today with Ben Kirk. Ben is a director at Inspired Schools and Inspired Somerset. I'm here with Ben today to talk all about staying active in your home during lockdown. Ben, how are you today?
Really good, thank you. Yeah, it's been a bit of a hectic day. Got a webinar later on social distancing in PE to help our schools out. So it's obviously a very hot topic. So yeah, but all good. Yeah, all good here. Any noise in the background? My girls are downstairs, so hopefully they'll behave themselves for the duration of this.
Well,
So we go.
We're a few hours ahead of you, I think. So I've managed to just put mine to bed. So I'm pretty lucky to do these a bit later. Otherwise, I don't think I'd be able to do it, right?
I know. You hear some interesting stories about business conference calls and things like that, and kids wandering around naked in the background. And
Right.
we won't have any of that. Don't worry.
There's that brilliant video I've seen on YouTube of, I think it's the news presenter or someone doing an interview for the news show, and his child opens up the door and comes in behind, and then I don't know who it is, the babysitter or someone tries to grab the child.
Removes them out. Yeah.
As soon as lockdown hit, I thought, there's a high chance I'm going to be that guy, you know?
Yeah, just kids tearing around the house. You might as well just get them to lead it. They'll be fine. I'll get them up here halfway through.
Yeah, that's it. Well, you should see Instructor Matt in action. You know, he's got a Warrior Academy team at home. Lots of Warrior Academy students who help him out in classes and actually give a really awesome demonstration of the technique. So he's pretty lucky. And we actually had a couple of people here in Dubai thinking we were running classes because we had so many students on one of the UK lives.
Yeah, I think I saw some of his stuff actually.
Sorry?
I think I saw some of his stuff. He's got a couple of girls?
Yes. Yeah. I think and normally we have about two or three warriors on the daily habits joining in. So it's quite inspiring for the other students to see, which is pretty cool. So tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you into what you're doing now. I know you used to work in schools as a PE teacher. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. So try and make a long story short, came out of university, didn't really have a clue what I wanted to do, to be quite honest. It was one of those where I've always played sport and been involved with sport my whole life, and it was kind of just the trodden path that I'll do A-level sports and I'll go and do a sports degree. And I finished my sports degree and it was like, well, what do I do next? So I did a bit of coaching in primary schools when I came out of uni, but again, I just kind of bumbled along and I went into it not really knowing what I wanted to do. And I enjoyed my time. It was with the local authority, Somerset Activity Sports Partnership, and I worked for them for around 20 months, but it wasn't necessarily a career choice. And I actually got offered a job with the Football Association, and it was an okay job. It was a skills coaching job, still in primary schools. I actually turned it down, and my now wife and I went traveling. We went away for 10 months. And to be honest, it's the best thing I ever did. We went away, had the time of our lives, but equally it opened our lives as to what's out there. And it's something that's still become a really big part of our lives as a family. We try and explore as much as we can, which obviously at the moment is difficult. But yeah, so did that and then came back, and that was kind of what gave me the real drive then to think, well, actually, this is kind of what I want to do. I know I want to work in education and in sport. So then I went to become a PE teacher, did my training. I was a cover supervisor for a couple of years to sort of get the experience needed to get onto my teaching course. And then I worked in secondary schools a secondary school for 2 years. And then sort of in combination with that, I was playing football semi-professionally at the time for Western-super-Mare in the Conference South. And it was a massive commitment. So like Tuesday, Thursday, Saturdays were pretty much Tuesday, Thursday evenings, Saturdays taking up playing, plus teaching, any teachers out there will know that it's a pretty hectic and intense job doing 70, 80-hour weeks plus my football. And much to the disgust of my parents at the time, we were married, she was pregnant with Izzy, our first daughter. And I actually quit my teaching job and went self-employed and took a bit of a gamble and set up on my own. Like I said, my parents were completely against the idea, and understandably so. But I knew I didn't want to quit and stop playing football because that was my sort of one passion, I guess, in my life. And And I guess to an extent it fell on my feet that I contacted the schools that I used to work in, primary schools, and just said, look, do you need anybody to come in and do some PE lessons? And fortunately enough, I managed to pick up enough hours to supplement my football money to pay enough mortgage, etc., and all of our bills. And it just went from there. And I went back into primary schools, and the first thing I noticed was, even though it was only an 8-year gap from working in primaries initially, when I went back in, the level of physical literacy, physical activity levels had dropped off. And it was really interesting to see. And it's not an exaggeration to see that I noticed children just weren't enjoying being active. And I'm a firm believer that every child loves being active at a young age. It's just something that children love. They love running around. If I put my 3-year-old in a field, she'd be fine for an hour. She'd just run around. We'd play tag games. We'd do anything. And she's happy. So it sort of sparked something in me. I thought, you know what, this needs to change. So I'll cut this shorter. It was our coaching. So I've now got a coaching company that does PE in primary schools. So started that off the back of it and started recruiting people after a year of more schools wanting me than I could deliver myself. And then Inspired Schools that you mentioned earlier, which is a national project trying to raise physical activities in primary schools, that launched 3 years ago. And that is just that. So we try and raise physical activity levels during the school day, during break times, lunch times, PE lessons, but we also train the school up so that they can access our products without teachers actually having to do it themselves. Because I think the biggest shift, and I'll finish on this point, the biggest shift that I noticed was teachers' time just became that much more precious, and they didn't have much additional time. So for me or any company to go, we've got this amazing product and it'll get your children active during the day, but it's going to take you an hour, 2 hours to plan it every week, it would just fade away. So I guess using the experience of working in the education sector for sort of 14 years now-ish, no longer than that, blimey. Yeah, and just coming up with some ideas that we knew would work. So that's kind of how I got into what I'm doing now.
Really, really interesting. So from your perspective, would you say there's currently less of a focus on physical education than there used to be?
100%. And I think it's a combination of things that it's not necessarily a conscious decision of the teachers to do that and head teachers, but I think it's in combination with, if I think back to when I was at school, and I mean, I was very fortunate. I went to a state school, but equally in that state school, we had 3 or 4 amazing teachers. And I say amazing teachers, they might have been the worst classroom teacher you've ever seen. But they were willing to give up their time to take us for football, cricket, basketball, badminton, tennis. We literally had access to every single sport going. And I think that was in the 90s. And then secondary school education has changed, and even primary school as well, that teachers are doing way more hours than they used to. So the willingness of teachers to go, well, yeah, I'll go and take a team for a fixture when it's 2 hours on top of their week, or possibly more than that. So yeah, it has changed a lot. Teachers are under way more pressure than they used to be. Exams, etc. There's more weight that they carry, and then I think PE is just unfortunately dropped down the rungs of the ladder, and it's just not quite prioritized like it used to be. And it might not even be that it was prioritized in the 90s. It might just have been that people had more time, and then children had more opportunities to access the clubs and things that I mentioned earlier. So I think that's kind of where we are.
Really, really interesting. Yeah, it certainly sounds like a kind of big shift has gone on. Just to touch on education before we go into the more of the current situation and the challenges parents face, just to sort of briefly talk about education a little. Do you feel like teachers have a lot of pressure put on them, maybe more pressure than they used to have?
I think so. Yeah. Again, using my own experience of when I was a child, I think I was one of the first year groups to sit the SATs exams in year 6, and I just don't remember it being a big deal. And I speak to mum and dad, and they were like, "No, there was no pressure on revision or anything like that." Whereas it's quite a stressful time for children now in year 6. And my biggest takeaway from having worked in schools is, and my daughter's in year 1, she'll be going into year 2 in September, my eldest, and my youngest starts school in September, is I don't want her to go through that because they do SATs in year 2 now and then in year 6. And this is a little bit contrarian, but I just don't see that is a metric that really carries a huge amount of weight as to how successful she's going to be in her life. Is she going to be a nice person? Is she going to be a well-rounded individual that can talk to people? I just don't see that as important, and I know that's quite controversial.
No, I love that. It's very aligned to the kind of Warrior Academy outlook. I think myself and my team and a huge number of parents who follow us and lean into our philosophy really believe that there seems to be a greater emphasis on academics over the development of character. And character development, which basically sums up a lot of what you just said in terms of emotional intelligence, developing leadership skills, a moral compass, all these important things, and confidence, and keeping young people happy. It's almost like the missing aspect of a child's development.
Absolutely. And I mean, I won't name the school, but I had a phone call from a school today sort of saying that they're not sure whether they want to continue with us in September, which is fine. Well, it's not fine, but it would be okay if it was down to our performance as a company. And I've actually spoken to them today, and that's not the case, but it's down to financials, which is a real shame, because there are so many. So obviously schools are supposed to get 2 hours of PE per week, and this school in particular only have 1 hour of PE a week, and that's delivered by us. So what's going to happen in September to those children? So again, it comes back to your point that is PE, physical activity, physical education, is it valued by primary schools? In some it is, and those schools thrive because of there's so many benefits of being active, right? You touched on a few things a second ago. The value of being active, and also being part of a team and exercising as a team, as a class, being a leader, etc. Those life skills that it can teach you is huge. And I think it's short-term thinking from a school to think, well, our maths results are poor, or our English results are poor, let's do more of that. Let's plow the kids with more English and maths. They're bound to become better. When in fact, take a step back, get them more active during the school day, have breaks in between lessons that get the children active in between, and then you're going to have a better, more well-rounded school, in my view.
I guess the challenge we're facing isn't with the individual schools; it's with the system and the approach, right? I mean, it's a school isn't graded on its success or failure based on how happy its students are, or how well developed their character is, or whatever it is in terms of that side of stuff. It's what are they getting in SATs? What are the academic results? The most important thing in schools is what are the academic results, and it's the difference between success and failure. And some of the teachers I speak to, they literally do, with some of the students, it's like 20% academic mentoring and 80% life mentoring, where they're literally mentoring children through some of the most difficult transitions of their life, right? Separation, chronic disease, bullying, all these really difficult things they're going through. And at the end of that year, where they may have mentored a child through this whole process, if that child hasn't got good grades, and it affects the whole, the overall average grades of the class, then that teacher's, seen as not performing to the best of their abilities in terms of their job role, which then obviously is reflected in the school as well, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. And if I think there's a school over the road from me, which is an amazing school, but it's in quite a deprived area. And for me, it's an outstanding school. I'm talking Ofsted criteria, which is another completely different subject, which we could talk about for an hour. But they can't get outstanding in Ofsted because of two reasons. Their attainment levels aren't good enough, so their SATs levels aren't good enough, and equally their attendance isn't good enough. And how that is a measure of how good a school is, I have no idea, because the children will come into the school at early years, and some of them can't speak properly. Some of them will go to school in nappies. Some of them I've actually experienced them being taken to school in a pushchair because parents are too lazy and they don't want to control their child while they're walking. So this girl I'm thinking of in particular, she had no core strength. She had no muscles built up in her glutes, in her quads. So when we came to do PE, she literally couldn't jump and get herself off of the ground. So these children were coming into this school, and high English as an additional needs as well. So I had a lot of children that just didn't comprehend English. So the teachers had a real tough gig in early years. But from where they come into the school to where they leave in year 6, there's just a complete contrast in those children. They come out with possibly not the best SATs grades you're ever going to see, but they can function in society. They've been through that school system. They're now active. They're now all the things that I mentioned earlier. They build on that whole child. Yes, the SATs results aren't great, and attendance, because of the lack of support with some of the families that attend that school, their children, there's only so much that they can do. So yeah, I guess that kind of highlights for me a real error in the education system at the moment, that we're valuing SATs so highly, but a school like that, who are incredible at what they do, and it's a bit of a sidetrack, but there's a lady in that early years called, she won't mind me mentioning her name, Mrs. Mullins, and she's close to retirement age, and honestly, she is the most amazing woman you will ever meet. So when I started the school 7 years ago, I thought she was a teacher, but she's not. She's a teaching assistant, and she's just outside with the kids all the time. So the actual early years part of that school is rated as outstanding, and she's got a huge part to play in that. If you would, any guest was to walk through that school, she would be outside with the kids playing swing ball, playing football, giving them beanbags, throwing and catching. She runs a gardening club after school. Wow. She's a legend.
I love that.
Yeah, honestly, and
well, this is it, isn't it? I mean, this is precisely one of the biggest things, right? I mean, there are some statistics in the Telegraph last year. 40% of teachers who join after studying to become a teacher quit in their first year.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I was one of them. Well, second year.
You don't count that, I'm afraid.
No, I don't quite make that stat. For me, it's quite clear. It's workload, it's stress, and if you meet a teacher that's been in the profession for longer than the time you mentioned there, it's because they love it. They're not financially rewarded. They're not massively well paid. The holidays, whilst they are nice, the teachers that love their profession don't really take much holiday. They love what they do and they're in it. So the teachers that leave, yeah, it's stress levels. It's also, I think, the way that teachers are viewed in society, that they're not necessarily viewed as professionals anymore. Like I said, when I was at school in the 90s, if I was in trouble at school, I knew that I would be in trouble at home, because mum and dad would completely back up whatever was said at school. And I was a good kid, so I wasn't really in much trouble. But I knew that there was kind of like a double deterrent, if you like. Whereas now, I feel like it's shifted, so that if a child's perhaps in trouble at school for whatever reason, the first port of call of some parents is, what have you done as a teacher to help my child? So I think that's part of it as well. Time pressures, workload, stress. Yeah.
Completely agree with you there. From a lot of the teachers I've spoken to, I mean, how long does it take to study to become a teacher?
4 years. So I think you can actually wrap it up in 3 years now. I think there are some degrees where you can do it in 3, but I did undergrad.
You need a degree. So you need a degree. And nowadays in the UK, you would spend a fortune to get a degree, probably end up in quite a bit of debt. You don't go through all of that to then become a teacher, unless you're passionate about doing exactly that. Unless you're passionate about teaching, and teaching that particular age group and teaching young people. Certainly, you've already invested 3 years into it, right? So from my perspective, not being a teacher, but having worked in over 100 schools and worked alongside a lot of teachers and worked with thousands of young people, it's not so much a case of they don't have the passion for it, but it's a case of they have a different perception of how they're going to be viewed when they become teachers. B, the workload, the pressure, the stress, and also the way in which success is measured, like we spoke about. But also I think they expect the support of parents and those above them, in leadership within schools, and there's almost this blame culture.
Yeah,
And they're from a lot of the teachers I've spoken to, they're almost stuck between, this kind of system which is marking them in a particular way, which isn't really relevant for what they actually do in their roles. And on the other side of that, parents who are pointing the finger at teachers too soon, without trusting teachers.
My daughter's just walked in the room with a swimming costume. No, girls, sorry. Can you go downstairs, please? Where's... Can you hear that?
Who's that?
Rosie. This is Layla. Do you want to come and say hello quickly?
Hi, Layla. You are live on the Warrior Academy podcast. Welcome. Maybe it's your first podcast. I think you did a great job.
She's the lively one. Sorry.
That's all right.
What was the latest thing we were saying?
What was the latest thing I was saying was that there is this pressure from above and parents as well, and there's this kind of blame culture going on. Yeah.
Yeah, and I completely agree. And again, if you compare generations, there's definitely a lack of resilience in children now compared to even like before my time. Like if I compare like what my dad's like in the era that he grew up in, with a father who was perhaps a little bit more removed from the household and didn't bring him up like my dad brought me up, and mum and dad brought me up. So kids were resilient back then, and they dealt with failure because they'd go and play whatever sport it was, or if it was an exam or a test or homework or whatever it was, and they were almost like it was right or wrong. There was no grey area in the middle. So, and even like when I was growing up, it was the same, that you kind of just dealt with those things. Whereas now you've got, and I think don't get me wrong, I think there's a place for non-competitive sports days and things like that, because what we don't want to do is have like an elitist system where we switch kids off to physical activity, because that's, well, for us as Inspired School, that's completely against our values, that we want every child to be active. But equally, if you are good at sport, that should be cherished, and you should be competitive when you go into the workplace later in life and you're competing for a job. For some children or some young adults, that might be the first time they've not succeeded in something, and then how do they deal with that? So, and I always give the example that I don't deliver in schools anymore myself, but when I've taken an after school club, for instance, football is my thing, so let's give football as an example, and you go into teams at the end, and I would always try and have different games going on, differentiate, maybe like 3 games, a higher ability, a middle, and a lower ability, so that they're all competing against their peers. But invariably there will be that comment to say, oh, these teams aren't fair, or a comment about a decision in the match when I'm trying to referee 3 games that are going on. I'm sort of stood as best positioned as I can. So I guess my point with that is there's not that sort of looking within to see what's happened. So the unfair team thing is a bit of a bugbear of mine, because if you start to talk about that, you've almost got that mindset already that you're going to struggle to get anything out of the game or whatever situation it is. Whereas if it's, oh yeah, well maybe they've got so and so in their team who's really good, but we've got these 2 players. Can we solve that problem? And that's just, I guess, just an example that I saw quite regularly in school, and I think my coaches would back that up. That does happen.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's really interesting what you would say. It's almost like one of the things that I often see is this kind of bubble wrapping around students, and it's not so much from competition, but it's from failure. It's from experiencing failure, right? It's almost like, and that goes back to the blame culture. If we as teachers or coaches or instructors or anyone leading young people let a young person experience failure and go home to their parents after experiencing failure, for a lot of parents, it's not put in the right context, and so then this blame culture kind of continues, right? And the challenge we've got, and I think a lot of schools approach this in the wrong way, rather than holding a strong position on this, it's almost shying away from the fact that failure is such an important part of life. It's not something bad. It's a signal of where to improve, right? And understanding that that's just a signaling process, a way of communicating back to yourself on what you need to work on. And without that, what we end up doing is raising children who, like you said, go out into adulthood, go into the real life world, and they shy away from failure. They don't know how to process it properly or put it in the right context. And ultimately, they either avoid it or they don't process it properly, and it shapes the decisions they make, or the work they choose, or the relationships they have, all these different things because of the way they understand failure or don't understand it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I taught when I was at secondary school. I taught a BTEC, and don't get me wrong, the course was okay, but this kind of helps the point that you're making, in that I think the BTEC that I taught was worth 4 GCSEs, I think, definitely 2, but possibly 4. And obviously that then counts towards the school's statistics that they put out there, X amount of A to C's, X amount of A to E's, but actually they've got 4 GCSEs wrapped up in this BTEC course that I was teaching to manipulate the figures of the school. And to come back to the point about failure, the children in that class at the time, it's changed since, but they could hand their coursework into me as many times as they wanted. So I wasn't allowed to fail them. They could hand it into me 3 times. And ultimately, if they haven't got it right after 3 times, I'm pretty much doing their work for them, which, what value is there? I would much rather see that lazy Stephen in the class didn't do his work, so he's allowed to fail. But again, it comes back to the importance of statistics and results, that the school can't afford for that child to fail, because then their funding's affected by that. And then on a Friday afternoon, I would quite often get just random children rocking up into my PE lessons. Oh, what are you doing here? I've been taken out of my geography. I'm not sitting my geography exam anymore, so I'm doing additional PE with you, sir. And I'm thinking, oh, great, that's brilliant. Friday afternoon with about 40 year 11 boys, because they don't want him to sit his geography exam, because again, he'll fail, but they can manipulate the figures. And don't quote me, I'm not sure if that's the same now, but it certainly was back then.
It's absolutely shocking, isn't it? I mean, it's frustrating to listen to that, really, because what is a school supposed to do if their funding is completely reliant on grades? And if they don't do these things, then that funding gets cut, and then that causes all sorts of other problems, right?
Absolutely, it does. Yeah, and you're talking staff shortages then, and they also get funding for the number of children that come to the school. So it's sort of double whammy, really, that if they get poor results, they get less funding. But then prospective parents are looking at it thinking, well, they've not got very good results. We'll send our child to the school down the road. So then they can't afford to pay their staff, and then the school just goes on this really downward spiral, and they end up getting poor teachers in potentially. Ofsted would come in and possibly put them into special measures, and then it just becomes really, really hard work for that school. I think we'll go full circle in terms of parenting. I think we're a product of how we're parented. So I mentioned my dad coming from that kind of environment, and I'm sort of borderline millennial. So mum and dad couldn't do enough for me growing up. I was a bit spoiled, not necessarily in terms of what I was bought, but in terms of didn't have to tidy my room, didn't even have to clean my football boots when I was growing up. That dad would do that. And that's not a negative on my dad. He's amazing, and I couldn't ask for any more supportive parents. But I kind of came out of that bubble thinking, well, everything's easy. My boots get clean. I've been successful in sport for this point in time, and I think there are other children that the parents perhaps feel like they're the best things since sliced bread, and if something doesn't quite go wrong, they might make excuses for their children. And certainly, so I reflect on how I was parented growing up, and try and, well, I think we all do, don't we? We try and learn from our experiences. So I try and, I'm a bit harder on my girls. So if Izzy gives up on something, I won't let her do it, and we'll talk about it, and we'll try and resolve whatever conflict or whatever problem she's had that she can't explore. I won't do it for her, which might have been the case when I was a child. If I struggled with my English homework potentially, which is one of the struggles of mine, I will
Yeah.
make her, not make her is probably not the right word, but I will try and tease out of her to try and get the best out of her, because I know that even if she finds it really hard and she hates me for that 30 minutes that I'm being really tough on her, if she can work it out herself, that the learnings that she'll gain from that are immeasurable compared to if I was just to go, oh, don't worry about it, I'll help you with that, I'll do it for you. So
Yeah.
I think parents might might end up going full circle with that, and it it'd be interesting to see how the next generation sort of turn out.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, some very, very interesting insights there, and I do see a bit of a shift in that way. But there is suddenly this kind of element of helicopter parenting, and parents doing a lot for their kids, more so than they used to, or more so than our parents maybe did for us. But yeah, and again, some amazing insights into the educational system in the UK in particular, and how important physical education is within the national curriculum, but perhaps how little it's focused on, and the benefits of PE within schools. But it'd be great now to kind of dig in. I know we were gonna just do a very brief introduction on the educational system, but
Yeah.
you can tell this is something myself and Ben could talk for hours about. Maybe what we'll do is we'll just change the title of this to
Yeah.
"What's Wrong with the Educational System?" And
Yeah.
but yeah, it'd be great to talk about staying active in your home during lockdown, because we've talked about how important that is in schools. So let's talk about the situation right now. The situation right now is that there are no schools open, really. I mean, they are starting to in the UK now. How many parents are actually going to send their kids to school? Not everyone. It's a very different environment. I don't know how much physical education is going to go on in schools right now if they do reopen, or how long that will be. So whether or not we're on lockdown or on a sort of hybrid lockdown, half going to school type environment, staying active at home is going to be massively important. So could you share some insights with us on how parents can keep their children active at home?
Yeah, absolutely. And as a sort of intro in, I think it's important to sort of note that the importance of being active now is probably it's recognized more than it ever has been because of the lockdown. More people are out walking here and cycling, etc. Make sure you go out for your hour. I know it's unlimited now, but I think parents and families and households are realizing just how important it is from a point of view of mental health, but getting children to sleep at the end of the day as well.
Yeah.
And obviously the physical benefits as well. So yeah, my two have actually been going into school for a couple of days a week because my wife works for the NHS, so she's a key worker. And yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying. PE in primary schools is going to be very, very different. We've got some of our team that are still out delivering, but they're delivering very different PE lessons. And equally, what I would love to see happen off the back of this is that physical activity in the home or in the garden or down the park, wherever it is, to continue. Because here in the UK, 30 minutes is recommended during the school day. Or sorry, it's not recommended, it's a requirement that every child is active for 30 minutes during the day. 60 minutes in total at home as well. And I think the difficulty with that is, again, PE is not necessarily valued highly enough in schools for schools to hit that 30 minutes. But equally, we know that the sporty, active children that love being active and have got supportive families, that's not a problem for them. If they don't have a PE lesson and they're not 30 minutes there, they'll probably be running around at lunchtime or break time. They'll probably come home and they'll go down the park with their friends and they're running around, or they'll be going to a club. Obviously, not at the moment, they won't be going to clubs. So for me, parents play a key role moving forward in not necessarily just playing games with their children in the home to get active, but just to raise that profile of being active as a family and creating that almost that ethos. So as a company, right at the start of the lockdown here, I did 2 weeks of Facebook lives doing physical activity examples, kind of like Joe Wicks. Joe Wicks is obviously doing, I'm sure everybody's aware of Joe Wicks and what he's doing, but he's doing those HIIT workouts, which are a little bit controversial in the PE world, but ultimately families and children are active. We tried to make it a little bit more relevant and related to PE, so incorporating equipment. just to try and make it as fun as possible. I know, like my two, we tried a few of the HIIT workouts, and don't get me wrong. Again, if you think of those active kids who love being active, those HIIT workouts aren't a problem. But for the ones that struggle in PE lessons, that aren't as coordinated, or maybe struggle with the fitness side of things, it's thinking about ideas. What can we do for those children in the home, in the garden, down the park, so that they can access physical activity? Because the worst thing in the world is to tell a child who has this kind of stigma attached to PE and physical activity that they hate it. Is most likely because they've had bad experiences. They've either been competing against children that are better than them and they've not experienced any success, and the PE that's been delivered is poor, or they've got negative experiences from parents and they almost get pushed on the children as well. So we just try to create like a bank of resources, and there's quite a number out there. I can detail a few during this conversation. One that springs to mind is by Yorkshire Sport Foundation, called This Is PE, #This Is PE. They've got some brilliant ideas. But again, it's kind of how can we use socks and rolled up piece of paper foil to sort of create games in the home, whilst actually trying to improve those physical education skills that you would get in a normal lesson in school. So that's what we've been trying to do, and just try and inspire parents and children to remain active, and hopefully that, as I said, will continue past the lockdown.
Yeah, amazing. Are there any? Sorry, go on, go for it.
No, sorry. Well, I was just going to touch upon gamification, which is one of the areas that I've tried to sort of embed into the games that I created. And don't get me wrong, I didn't do a huge amount, trying to sort of run the business and create games as well. So we did it. We've got like a bank of about 15. But even though I've created those resources, my girls still want to do PE during the school day when I've got them. And by gamification, I mean things like how can they challenge themselves? How could they get to the next level? So if we're doing like a target throwing thing, well, what would make this harder? What would make it easier? So Layla, as you saw earlier, so Layla's 3, Izzy's 6. So Layla's going to find things hard that Izzy would find easy. So how can Izzy potentially challenge Layla, or how can she help Layla to solve some of the problems that I would sort of create for her? And it might be something really simple, that throwing a scrunched up piece of paper into a waste paper bin. How can I make that harder for Izzy, or better, how can Izzy work out how to make it harder for herself? So we were just gamifying it in terms of that, in terms of levels, in terms of challenges. Sometimes I'd create almost like an obstacle course, a race, with the same goal, that they had to maybe go and get something or throw something at a target at the end. And this is all done in the lounge. And with those routes, there would be different challenges as they explore that route. So it might be that one route, she has to jump over the sofa and she has to go under a mat or something, or towel. Whereas the other route, it might be straightforward, but she has to do some hopping and skipping. So then I would ask her, which way do you think is going to be quicker to get you to the end goal? And then she starts to think about, well, this way looks quicker. Okay, we'll give it a try. What have you found out? What have you experienced? Do you want to try and go the other way now? And I'll time you, and we'll see how long it takes. And then obviously Layla wants to join in as well. And we can time Layla, and I can ask Izzy questions about, well, how can we make it easier for Layla? So we're just, gamifying it, making it into a game that's as fun as possible. And also then, if I think of my two, they're a bit of a whiz on the old iPad at the moment, as I'm sure a lot of children are. What do they love about those games that are on the iPad? Well, they get like instant rewards at the end of it. If they solve a problem, a sound goes off and they get a star or something. So we've tried to incorporate that into it as well. So like marbles as counters or point scoring mechanisms, or some of the girls' toys that they get afterwards, and then they can play with those toys. Not that I would stop them playing with their toys, but just to make it a bit of fun. So that's how we've tried to gamify things. And I know that's a specific example.
Amazing idea, and just makes things it's super engaging and amazingly fun.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest thing. And for the conversations that I've had with parents, it's quite daunting, right? Being a teacher at home, trying to teach English, maths, PE, all these things that, as we said earlier, teachers have had 4 years of training and they're experts in their field. For parents to suddenly pick up that, it is quite daunting. So from a PE standpoint, it's just about having fun and trying to incorporate different movements and making it interesting, like I said, to gamify it, but equally having that decision-making element. So it's not just me deciding all the time what they're doing, that they can choose the equipment that we're using. Layla loves, so one other thing that's really useful is trying to find out, or I mean, parents will already know this, but what their children love, like what are their passions, what would they go and play with if they had nothing else to do. So for Layla, it's Paw Patrol. She's obsessed with Paw Patrol. So we played, and I made this up, it's a battleships game. So everybody hopefully is familiar with the battleships game, where you are throwing something at a target, or it's not throwing, but we did in this scenario. So I had like Paw Patrol cars on my side of the hall, lounge, and then she would have Paw Patrol cars on her side of the lounge. And then we'd use a balled up pair of socks, and we would try and throw the socks at the Paw Patrols. And if I hit, I would bring it over to my side. If she hit one, she would take it over to her side. We then talked about, so with Izzy, we then thought, oh, how can we make that harder? How can I make it more challenging? So we added in blocking, so that when I was throwing it, she's actually trying to knock the socks out the way. So it was just trying to think, well, if I did this with books, for instance, as a target, or DVD cases, yes, the game is the same, but if I hit Rubble, which is Layla's favorite character, then she's going to go, oh, I want to get Rubble back. So just to make it related to something that she loves. So I don't know what Minecraft is really, but I know children talk about it in primary schools. How could you incorporate that into the activities? So it's just finding out what they love. And again, Frozen at the moment, the girls love Frozen, but obviously it doesn't have to be. It could be whatever the children are interested in. But we would do like a Frozen warm-up where we're like freezing each other as the tag game, and we're all characters. Each character's got a different way of moving and that type of thing. And they love it. They're using their imagination. Layla the other day said to me, "Oh, can we play the game with the logs and the tiger and snake?" And I'm thinking, what game is this? And it was just literally, and it can be chaotic, right? That sometimes we can go way off track and we're not actually learning anything. We're just being animals in the front room, which is, yeah, it's fine. We're active. It's fun for them. But ultimately, yeah, she wanted to explore the jungle. We did like a jungle warm up. But when we were jumping over logs, and if there was a snake, we'd try and dodge it, and we'd try and run away from the tigers. But we're still working on those fundamental movement skills, those patterns that they will build up when they go to primary school. So yeah, fun is the key thing, I think, with the whole thing.
It sounds like, you know, one of the massive things there is making it relatable to things that they really enjoy and that they're interested in. One of the things that I know quite a few parents have mentioned they're doing is kind of weaving subjects, and, you know, not so much highly academic subjects, but just trying to weave in some of these subjects into the kind of learning and making it super active, right?
Absolutely. And there's loads of data and science out there to say that if active children perform better in the classroom for numerous reasons. The endorphins are going, they're engaged, they're focused, and they've got a longer concentration span. But equally, like you said, if you can weave physical activity into those subjects, then it's win-win. So Izzy, rewind a few weeks, we're doing like a maths problem, and I was just sort of sat down at the table, and it was almost like a case of, like, what am I doing? I'm doing all the things that I'm against. So I'm sat down at a table trying to teach her maths.
Yeah.
And right, do you know what? Right, let's leave this. Let's go outside, and we use the cones that I've got in the garage, luckily, as like counters. So we were doing, like, I think it was factors of 10 or something like that. But we turned it into almost like a relay race. So she would have to run, go and get a cone which equated to like 2 or something, and then come back, and she'd have to build 10. Layla was just running and getting cones.
She's getting more tired in maths class than she is when she's doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
No more maths.
I know. Yeah, let's do PE. Where's that tiger?
Oh dear. But yeah, I mean, what an amazing way to inject enthusiasm into it, right? And the endorphins are buzzing, energy's involved, and it's easier to remember things as well, right? I'm sure there's some science backing that. It's easy to remember things when you're physically involved, and when you're being told something, you remember a certain percentage. But when you're doing a movement which associates it that kind of thing you need to remember with what you're doing, suddenly you memorize more of it, right?
Yes, it's that light bulb memory, isn't it? You kind of remember things that stick out in your mind. Like if you think back to your childhood, you probably got 10 memories that would spring to mind straight away. So I guess it's trying to replicate those memories. Like Izzy won't forget that math lesson because she was shattered afterwards.
Yeah, right.
But
it's been a tough lockdown for Izzy. It sounds like,
yeah, I know. Yeah,
she's been doing some active national curriculum stuff at home.
She's ready for Tokyo next year now.
I do think that a lot of parents are kind of realizing what a role teachers actually have, and how demanding and challenging that role is right now that we are having to homeschool ourselves. Teachers do an awful lot.
They do, they really do. And even so, the schools that we work in, we try and encourage to weave in physical activity during the school day within a school, a typical school day. And again, it's kind of taking 2 steps back to go 3 forward, if you like. That it might take a while for it to take effect. And it's the same thing at home, that if children are doing homework, so like the older children that I know are part of the Warrior Academy, if they're doing homework, then it's not necessarily right, we're bogged down for an hour, you've got to do your homework. It could be that you have a break in between every 20 minutes, right? Let's go and do something in the garden, or go and do something in the front room, or whatever it might be. I don't know, it's harder as children get older because they don't necessarily want to play with mum and dad in the front room, and they might be a bit too cool for school. But I'm sure there's something that they can do to engage the mind. If it's English, do it outside. I mean, the weather's gorgeous here at the moment. Izzy was doing some English the other day, and we did it in the garden with just the sounds of being outside, the birds and the wind and the sun, etc., etc. Just feels nice, right? It's just nice to be outside. You don't have to get them running around like a lunatic. But yeah, there's loads that we can do, and I think typically, again, we are a product of our experiences. And if we were taught in the classroom when we were a kid and we didn't really go outside to learn, that's kind of what we think is how it should be done. When actually we can mix it up. We can do lessons outside. We can do a little 5-minute activity burst in the middle of a lesson and then go back to it. That's fine.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's keeping it varied, keeping it exciting, and just maintaining that engagement, right? What about child-led exploring?
Yeah, I mean it's massive. Again, looking at some less fortunate countries. I mean, like I said, football's my sport, but you look at some of the best players that have ever played the game currently, like Messi, previously like Maradona, Pele. They wouldn't have had anything growing up, so they would just been outside on the streets probably, or down the local sort of recreation area, just refining their skills. They wouldn't have had a coach. They wouldn't have had somebody that's telling them, "Oh, that the way that you're dribbling the ball there is not quite right. Try and do this." Like Messi only ever used his left foot, but if he was growing up here, invariably somebody would have said, "Well, can you use your right foot, please?" And he's the best player of our generation, in my opinion. So I'm going a bit sidetracked, but that exploring, in my view, is just as important as a coach questioning. And as our role as educators, teachers, coaches, whatever role people are in, it's not, this is how you do something. And I was a product of that environment. And I think of cricket, everybody was very, English players are very technically correct. But ultimately, if it works, does it matter how you do it? And can children work it out themselves? If you're teaching a child how to roll the ball, then, and I actually got an experience of this when I was doing a lesson and a teacher was observing me to sort of guide her practice and her professional development. And all we were doing year ones, rolling a ball, trying to get it to stop inside a hoop. And we made it active. It was fun, but she was constantly correcting the children in her class and stopping them, saying, "This is how you do it. This is what you do with your arm." And I would give them some sort of guidance to perform within. So maybe like a straight, try and have your arms straight and hold the ball like this. Maybe that was it. But then it would be more a case of, "Oh, if your ball's going too far, why? And then they'd start to think about it. So it's more important to kind of tease that information out. But equally, like you said about the children exploring, they will work it out themselves because they want to succeed. I mentioned that gamification earlier. If a child's on an iPad, they'll want to try and get to the next level, and they'll work it out. Ultimately, if I've got a rolling lesson and we're rolling into hoops, or if you've done the big hoop and you've rolled it in there 3 times, then you progress onto the green hoop, whatever it might be. And then they all want to get to the highest level. So they'll try and work out things. And then it's our job as educators to not necessarily tell, but just to guide that experience. And equally that peer learning as well. So children exploring, like I said about Izzy, exploring the different routes and working out which is best for her. Same applies for techniques and skills. But for her then to help her younger sister, or in a classroom environment to help maybe children that haven't quite got it yet, that's massive as well, because children are then learning off of their peer group. But equally then Izzy's consolidating her learning because she can do it, but she's then describing to other children how she's doing it to help them achieve success. So it's just really nailing down that learning, I suppose, and which is really big for children.
Yeah, definitely. And it sounds like, you know, the way in which you talk to a child needs to be done in a certain way where it's not too autocratic, it's not too demanding, it's kept fun, it's kept engaging, and children kind of almost feel like when they're doing something, it's almost their own idea, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Especially if you've got 2 stubborn girls like I have. If you try and if they think it's their idea, it's the best thing in the world. It's like, yeah, I thought of that originally, but and they're gonna, and the whole choices thing is key. This is more behaviour management sort of topic, but for Layla, who she can be challenging at times. Don't get me wrong, she's not hard work, but she can be challenging. She's very stubborn. But then if I give her 2 challenges, or 2 choices rather, or we can either do this or we can do this, then she will make a choice out of those, rather than go, right, you're doing this. She'll go, no, I'm not doing that. So if I give her two choices, then she will invariably choose one of them. And
we're going through that right now with Molly. She's almost 3. And it's her first reaction when you ask her to do something is no. And I was digging into this, and the reason for that is because she wants control over the situation, right? So we started doing exactly what you just said. Instead of asking to do something, it was, oh, do you want to wear these shoes or these shoes, rather than get your shoes on, right? And suddenly life became a little bit easier, 5% easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's never going to be easy bringing up girls. Actually, there's a brilliant book called Raising Girls. I don't know if you've seen it.
I need to dig that one out.
That's was it
written by instructor Matt?
Has he got 2 girls?
He's watching this right now. He says, running through the jungle is a solid warm-up. What else have we got here? Definitely making pad work more fun with the noodles, spinning sock, said to make it more challenging. Yeah, definitely. And my youngest just heard Paw Patrol, instantly engaged.
There you go, see. Paw Patrol's a winner.
That's it. Winner. Just to sort of to finish up, because we're almost reaching the hour. Do you have any sort of practical ideas or games that you could suggest to parents who are watching today to keep their children motivated and keep them active at home?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll list some of the games that we've played, and I'll describe some of the ones that might be a bit more obscure. But as I said, on our YouTube channel, there are some examples on there. Plus,
what's the name of the YouTube channel?
Inspired Schools. So go
to Inspired Schools on YouTube, and you'll be able to see. Will they be able to see videos of these games in action?
Yeah, so the lives that I did with Izzy are on there, so they're like 30 minutes long. So if you wanted to do a whole PE lesson, you can. But I've also broken those videos down into sort of 2 to 3 minute clips for each activity. And again, Yorkshire Sport, This Is PE is another good one, which is, I think they've probably got about 20 videos on their channel now as well.
When you started your lives, I thought you were going to knock Joe Wicks off the charts, because you were getting so many people watching your lives.
I think we had like 4,000 in the first day or
Amazing.
something ridiculous. Yeah,
And
Izzy
then
ran out of steam. That's my excuse.
Wick started to get more involved. Nightmare.
I know, my nemesis, the nation's PE teacher.
Nation's PE teacher should be Ben Kirk, shouldn't it? Come on.
One day, I'll kick him off that top spot.
So tell us the favourites. Tell us the top three.
Yeah, so the ones that the girls want to continuously play is the battleships game that I mentioned.
Yeah.
So really straightforward. Split the front room or garden into two, and have objects on either side that you're just throwing either a sock or a ball or scrunched up piece of paper at. And you can have different rules within that. You can either collect that object and bring it over to your side, or if you hit it, as in real battleships, that is destroyed and it's out the game. So, and then you can add in blocking as well, which makes it a bit more interesting, a bit trickier. A really, are you still there? I'll carry on talking because it is live. I'm taking over the show. Another really sort of simple one is dodgeball. So we use balled up socks, scrunched up socks for our dodgeball game. And what we do with that is just throw the socks at each other. We have the room is split into two, and we're just throwing the socks at each other. No real rules or ways to win. Noughts and crosses is a good one. So you create like a noughts and crosses grid, and you can use socks versus cans of beans, whatever it might be. Run, put that into the noughts and crosses, run back, and then Seb just said his computer's gone, so he'll be back on in a second. So yeah, noughts and crosses, run, put whatever object it is, noughts or crosses or beans or whatever you're using, and that's a good way of being active whilst playing a really straightforward game. So that's noughts and crosses. We've played indoor cricket, so we'd use a book as a bat, and what we would do is have pillows or cushions dotted around the room that are our fielders, and we'd use a scrunched up piece of paper for that, or again, balled up piece of sock, and they would hit the ball. So I would throw it or bowl it, and they would hit the ball, scrunched up piece of paper. If it hit the wall, it's a 4. If it hits the wall without bouncing, it's a 6. If it hits the wickets, which was usually a waste paper bin, then that would be out. And if it hit the cushion, that would also be out. That was really popular. What else have we got? Fun warm-up games. You've got the bean game, so different types of beans: jumping bean, running bean, chili bean, frozen bean. You can make up as many as you want. That's just a nice quick warm-up game. Washing machine game is a good one. All these are on the YouTube channel, and they're like 2 minutes long. So washing machine games are good sort of warm-up for gymnastics. Different pieces of washing equate to a different balance, a different shape. And targets is really easy to use. Use saucepans, use waste paper bins, we use whatever you've got, and trying to throw things into targets so that to score points. Again, gamify it. It could be that a certain amount of a different piece of equipment equates to a different point. You can have different distances, different targets, smaller, bigger. And with all the games, always think about, it was called the step principle. So space, how much space are you using? Time, is there a time element attached to it? Equipment, so could you make the equipment further away, closer together to make it harder? And P, what's P? Not sure. I'll have to come back to that one. So those are a few games. Hopefully Seb's going to come back and bail me out, but I will keep going for some different games. You could play, if you've got balloons, really easy way for younger ones to play some sort of tennis type games, volleyball games, create a net, hitting the balloon over that. Or older ones, you can start to use socks or a tennis ball, again using books, trying to hit the ball. That's really good. You can create a golf course using books, DVD cases, cut up pieces of paper to create that golf course, and you can either kick the ball through that golf course or roll it or hit it with a book to make it a bit more related to golf. I'm running out of ideas here, Seb. I think one of the biggest things for me when setting up these indoor games is chaos is okay, and again that applies to teachers as well, that PE is chaotic, but that's okay in PE. I think teachers tend to struggle with that chaos because it's unfamiliar. You're outside potentially in a zone where there are no restrictions to where the children can go. But that's okay. It's okay that a ball gets hit where it shouldn't be, or kids are invading into other people's space in an invasion game of football, basketball, whatever it might be. So chaos is okay, and actually a lot of learning takes place in chaos. If it's too structured and too rigid, the children, it's not as enjoyable because they might have set areas that they can go. They might not be able to sprint. They might not be able to throw or hit. So I think the key thing to me is to make it fun and not be too hard on yourself as a parent or as a teacher trying to deliver PE if it's not your specialty. Don't be too hard on yourself. The biggest thing that we're trying to get out of this is for children to be active, for them to love being active, and to inspire them to make lifelong healthy choices beyond the mandatory PE lessons that they will have in primary school and secondary school. So that's kind of what we want to happen for us as a company, but also for me as a parent, and also for the children that we teach and we help. We want them to be active throughout their lives. That's a good sign-off point. I think I'm going to leave it there. I'll give it one more minute, see if Seb comes back on. Right, I'm going to have to go because I've got, as I said earlier, I've got a webinar later this evening, which I need to get ready for and get the girls fed and watered. Apologies for Layla diving in midway through. I hope you've all enjoyed it. I hope there's been value. If you want to find out more about us, Inspired Schools on YouTube for those videos, but also inspiredschools.co.uk. We work in primary schools in the UK, and we have national coverage. So if you are a teacher or you're involved with schools, then our mission vision is to get children active and more active during the school day, helping with engagement, behaviour, focus, all the things that we've talked about, building resilience. So we pride ourselves in raising physical activity levels, and that's all trackable through our web application. I won't say any more other than to say take care, stay safe, and I hope there was value in this conversation. Thank you. Bye-bye.